Brought up in Jenkins, and during those years, the friends and the people were very special to me. After the service, college, and entering the business world, I returned a couple of times a year to visit my family and friends, and these were trips that I always looked forward to. Dave Zaguerre came to Jenkins after World War II, and we worked one summer together. Dave and his family became longtime residents of Jenkins, and he remained until his early retirement a few years ago. During the years, Dave and I would meet at various business meetings. At this time, invariably, our conversations would turn to those wonderful people and those days in Jenkins. Recently, after one of these meetings, we concluded that a film should be made about Jenkins. And this is how the birth of a coal mining town, Jenkins, Kentucky, that wonderful place, came into being. You are going to learn things about Jenkins which you were not aware. Dave and I were very pleased to produce this film, and we hope that you will have as much enjoyment in viewing it as we did in making it. And now, we would like to introduce to you Mr. George E. Evans, Jr., the Secretary of the Energy Cabinet for the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
The Commonwealth of Kentucky's history of coal mining dates back to pre-Civil War days. It has been a progressive development since those days, often turbulent, but always colorful and exciting. The town of Jenkins in the eastern coal field is a classic example of how a community came into being for the sole purpose of mining and marketing bituminous coal, a very special grade of coal that can be found only in the small area in and around Jenkins. The local mountaineers called it bird's eye cannel coal, and they boasted they could light a lump of it with a single match. Consolidation Coal Company realized that these seams of high-grade coal would have a tremendous market value and purchased 101,000 acres by January 1911. They moved rapidly to develop the wilderness area into a mining community. Roads were built where none existed. Materials and machinery were hauled in ox-drawn wagons. Rail lines were extended, and hundreds of construction workers set about building homes and commercial buildings with a fervor and tenacity that bordered on the miraculous. In a few short years, the towns of Jenkins and McRoberts were bustling with mining activity. Miners and their families settled into a closely knit community life. Many had come from other parts of this country, the British Isles or Central Europe, but they were unified by a common desire to work hard and to provide a good environment for their growing families. Children grew up, went to work for the same company where their parents had worked, or hired on to mine the same diggings their fathers had started. Over the years that ensued, Jenkins contributed much to the growth of eastern Kentucky, both in economy and in the quality of life. Since those early days of Jenkins, coal mining has been a major source of employment for our state. Currently, there are between 92,000 and 100,000 jobs in mining and related industries, generating $570 million in state revenues. Many who left home to pursue other careers carried with them the pride instilled by their parents and friends. They are proud of their Jenkins and Kentucky heritage. As Secretary of the Energy Cabinet of the Commonwealth of Kentucky, I extend my personal congratulations to the citizens of Jenkins for their part in making coal mining a leading industry in our state, and for the contributions of their forefathers in creating and maintaining a community that we are proud to hold up as an example of the American spirit.
16 tons, what do you get? Another day older and deeper in debt. St. Peter, don't you call me, 'cause I can't go. I owe my soul to the company store.
Travelers passing through Jenkins, Kentucky would hardly realize the intense activity early in this century that created this Appalachian mining town. Today, what appears to be a typical eastern Kentucky town was once a showcase community, a marvel of man's ingenuity and tenacity. This region, at the headwaters of the Elkhorn Creek, has been known as a source of high-grade coking quality coal since 1881. Civil War veteran Richard Broass discovered the valuable seams and accurately mapped their scope and extent. No effort was made to mine the field, however, until April 1911, when Consolidation Coal Company purchased 101,000 acres of the land previously acquired by Broass. At that time, it was estimated that 2 seams alone would produce 1 billion tons of the highest grade coal then known. Unfortunately, this rich coal field was in a very remote location with practically no roads and no immediate rail access. The nearest rail line, the Chesapeake and Ohio, was some 30 miles distant. Supplies, food, and equipment had to be hauled by wagon over 18 miles of mountain trails and newly constructed roads. It was a monumental task supplying the needs of hundreds of workers. Consolidation moved rapidly to open the area to mining. Jenkins, named after one of the mine officers, was constructed near the headwaters of Elkhorn Creek, under conditions that at times seemed impossible. So vigorous was the activity that within a short time they had erected hundreds of residences to house the miners, most of them on the steep sides of the mountain. In addition, a large office building, a company store, a hospital, a school, a warehouse, hotels, churches, and even a YMCA were constructed. Elkhorn Creek was dammed, creating a beautiful 15-acre lake with a central power plant at the north end. 8 mines were opened on the eastern side of the coal field, close by Jenkins, and another 6 were opened on the western side near the newly constructed town of McRoberts. Railway spurs were laid to bring out the coal from the new mines and to connect up with existing lines. A total of $40 million was expended in construction and equipment before the first coal shipment went to market. The investment paid off remarkably over the decades of mining that followed. To build the hundreds of homes and other structures, large quantities of lumber and brick were needed. The land owned by Consolidation abounded in timber of all types, so one of the first orders of business was to set up sawmills and brick yards. 9 sawmills were erected, including some big bandsaws as well as the conventional circular saws. Timber cutting crews supplied the logs from mills where they were quickly ripped into beams and planks and other forms of dimensional lumber for the builders. To supply the brick for the main office building, company store, recreation building, warehouse, power plant, hospital, and other permanent structures, 2 brick yards were outfitted and put into operation. Native clay from the section called Brickyard Hill supplied the raw material for making the bricks. Local stone was quarried in Wheaton Hollow. Before the rail lines were extended to Jenkins, all the heavy equipment had to be hauled in by wagons, pulled by teams of oxen. As many as 20 head of oxen were used to pull heavy equipment, such as boilers weighing 16,000 pounds each for the powerhouse. 2 locomotives totaling 66,000 pounds were hauled in by these incredibly strong beasts of burden. Horses, too, played an important role in bringing in wagon loads of food supplies, personnel, equipment, and other necessities of daily life in the growing community. Most of the workers and miners were recruited from afar due to the shortage of local labor. Many miners from Wales and England responded to the recruiting promises of the company, leaving their pits to move to the New World. Quaint old English can still be heard among the townsfolk, and many residents are descendants of the original workers and miners. Recreation needs of the early residents were provided for by the company. A large brick recreation building housing a theater for shows and movies, a soda fountain, rooms for guests, a Western Union office, and areas for educational displays was erected on Main Street adjacent to the main office building. Employees, their families, and other visitors also had a large 4-story clubhouse for their use along the lake shore. Of course, the lake itself provided a place to picnic, to boat, to swim, and in the winter to skate and sled. At the lake's north end was the central powerhouse, and just in front of it, a city park where many special events took place. A baseball park, complete with bleachers where the local teams competed, was laid out in one of the few flat areas of the terrain. First aid drills and sports events also used the facilities of the park. Sports were a big part of the recreation of Jenkins. In 1912, Jenkins started a bowling league, one of the first ever to be organized. Alleys in the basement of the recreation building were kept busy as this sport became popular. Baseball and football were an outlet for the competitive spirit of early Jenkins. The Lonesome Pine Baseball League was organized, later to be followed by the Mountain State League. Many fine ball players were developed. Some like Earl Webb, Bob Bowman, and Bonnie Weaver went on to play in the major leagues. Consolidation would recruit good ball players and keep them by providing work at the mines. Miners would go to work at 3 or 4 in the morning, and then, when their shift ended at 11 o'clock, they would head for the baseball field. There was always a fierce rivalry between the Jenkins teams and those of Burdine, Dunham, and McRoberts. Football, too, was a popular school sport for both the players and the spectators. And again, there was a sense of intense rivalry among the 4 neighboring towns. The teams played hard, and winning was always their main concern. Raven Rock, a huge rock outcropping high up on Pine Mountain, was and is a popular recreation spot. From its crest, a visitor can see the whole town of Jenkins nestled in the valley and on the hillsides. It's a favorite haunt for photographers as well as picnickers and hikers. Jenkins was considered quite a showplace by consolidation, so it was visited by many inspection teams. These were comprised of company officers, government officials, customers, members of the press, and visitors from abroad. The size of these teams ranged from 5 or 6 persons to 50 or 60 or more. The members were guided through the town facilities, the outlying mines, and often ended up with a picnic atop Raven Rock. Visitors were treated royally, and of course the tour was impressive, providing a good public relations vehicle for the company. Although most mining camps of that era did not consider education important and often used children to work in the mines or tipples, Consolidation built a school in 1912 and later formed the Jenkins Independent School District. Included were the towns of Burdine, Dunham, and McRoberts. C.V. Snap was the 6th superintendent of the district to be employed. He came to the area in 1929 and still lives in Jenkins. The following is a portion of an interview by Dave Zagier of the 100-year-old Jenkins man.
What was your assignment?
Well, my assignment was superintendent of schools.
I see.
Yes, and I had a good board too, a good board.
Roughly how many students did you have back then?
Well, the greatest number we ever had while I was here, but that was after I'd been here about 3 or 4 years. We had right close to 3,000 children.
3,000 children in your school?
But when I came here, we had about 2,400. But they picked up some. See, and we had we had over 11,000 people here in this school district.
And of all the students you had, did a lot of them go on to college, or did they stay
Oh,
here?
yes, they did. We talked it all the time. You must get preparation, and I think a great number of them did.
What were some of your problems in the school system back then?
Finance.
Mm-hmm.
Finance. But the people, that's another thing that I'm happy to say, that people voted on themselves that little tax, you see, and that was made the difference between what we couldn't have had the school if it hadn't have been for about $20,000 that little vote brought in.
Mm-hmm.
It just made the difference.
Mm-hmm. Did you have any problem in getting teachers to come here in the mountains?
Yeah, that was a big problem.
Where did most of your teachers come from?
Well, most of them came from Eastern Teachers College and Berea.
Mm-hmm.
and that's the two institutions. Of course, they're both down there in the bluegrass country.
What are some of the pleasant memories that you have back in those early years, C.V.?
Well, of course, it's people. It's people. It's the wonderful people that I met, and the people that worked with me. And you can't say that the finest thing that people can have is good friends. And I made good friends. And there was something that caused us to work together.
Mr. Snap was responsible for organizing the first student band. It was called the Jenkins School Band, although it included students from other towns in the district. Other bands sponsored by the company were organized and would entertain in the bandstand in the city park on weekends and on special occasions. The company's store was the central location for most of the family's transactions. Consolidation issued scrip, paper money, and coins that could be traded in the store for food and other necessities. Miners and other company employees were paid either partially or in full with company-issued scrip. The name scrip comes from the term manuscript, which designated the original paper money. Later, it was also applied to the metal coins, which usually were in denominations of 5, 10, 25, 50 cents, and $1. Some companies also had a 1 cent and even a $5 coin. The large $5 scrip usually had a fluted edge to distinguish it from the $1 piece. These coins were called pieces by the miners and also nicknamed them flickers. Perhaps it was because they flickered in light or in the sunlight. Jenkins scrip is hard to come by now and is considered valuable by collectors who wish to assemble a full set of company-issued coins. Elkhorn Dairy was inaugurated with a herd of 36 milk cows to supply milk, butter, and other dairy products for the town. The milking barn was well equipped with stanchions for the cows and was considered quite modern for its time. A comfortable home for the dairy manager was built adjacent to the large milking barn where he could keep an eye on dairy operations. Other cattle were raised to supply meat for the town. A butcher shop and meat market near the main office building offered the best cuts of beef for hungry miners and their families. Produce was also available at the meat shop and was attractively displayed in the well-lighted front windows. A point of pride was the neat, well-tended flower garden in front of the meat market. To supply the staff of life and other baked products, a makeshift bakery was first constructed. Later, it was replaced with a well-equipped permanent brick building near the railroad tracks. Bread, cakes, and buns from this bakery were sold in the company store. The coal from the Elkhorn mines came to be known as true Elkhorn coal, and Consolidation later named it Cavalier, selling it under the protection of this trade name as a guarantee to be from the true Elkhorn seam. This coal was of the highest quality with low ash, sulfur, and phosphorus content. Coke produced from it was very hard and free burning, making it desirable in metallurgical processes. The company also took great care in mining of its coal to see that it was free from contamination by slate, black rash, or other impurities. In addition, careful inspection was maintained on the tipples to make sure any impurities were removed before loading the coal for market. A field laboratory and sampling equipment provided further assurance of the high standards of the Elkhorn coal. Its famous coal notwithstanding, the most important ingredient of Jenkins is its people. Some of those who were involved in the very early years are still around and enjoy recounting their experiences. George Fugate came to Jenkins after serving as an Army officer in World War I and stayed on till he retired in 1961. He was 94 years old at the time of this interview by Dave Zagier and currently resides in Lexington, Kentucky. Like C.V. Snap, he has an excellent recall of those early years.
I loaded coal, and I mean, I used a breast auger, and that's something that separates the men from the boys. If anybody's ever used it, George, breast auger is a great long auger.
Yeah, explain what loading, hand loading is, and
Yep.
drilling.
Well, we had we had a room that was maybe 15 feet wide, something like that, and we'd bore holes in one corner. And
It's like using a carpenter's brace and bit.
Yeah.
All right.
But once you'd be drilling that coal, and as long as it was coal, it was fine. But once you'd hit a sulfur ball, and I mean, you'd work yourself to death trying to get through that sulfur ball, but it was really not too difficult to drill, except when you ran into those things. But then we'd load it with black powder, and you had a long bar that went into the charge, and you tamped coal around that bar, so you just left a hole outside, so you light a squib, we call it, a little short thing with some powder in it, and that squib would go back in there and explode that powder, and that'd blow a little out of the corner. Then we'd go to the left of that and drill some more holes. Then it was easy to blast coal across the face of this room. But when you blast the coal down, you load it over in a mine car over there.
Just like using a gardening shovel?
Yeah,
a
number
shovel.
3, except it was wider. Number 3 red edge was the best.
And looking back on your life in East Kentucky, anything else you'd like to say about growing up in Jenkins and the mountain area?
It was Jenkins was a great place to live. I mean, I'm going to try to stay 3 years. I said, I'm going to stay 3 years, so then I'll take a look, see what I want to do. And I stayed 43. But I dearly love Jenkins. I mean, there was something about Jenkins that I've seen people come there and they'd say, I couldn't stand in this town. I'm not going to stay here. But they'd still, after a while, you'd have to run them out. I mean, you couldn't get them to leave. There was something about Jenkins and about the conformation of the land there that somehow or another you developed at home feeling. I don't know where you found that. That's what I found. And I think I've talked to a lot of people that found it just the way that everything was located and the convenience and the neighborliness of people. I mean, people.
Well, I'm like you. I went there after World War II with the thoughts of staying just a short time, and I stayed 31 years. So
Yeah.
It was 31 good years, too.
Right, yeah.
Well, George, thank you very much. Been very interesting to sit with you and reflect upon your memory of Jenkins back in the old days. And for 94 years old, you're a pleasant person and a sharp mind. And just been interesting to sit with you.
Big head.
Oh, no, not you, George.
Give me, Mick.
Coal mining is not without its hazards, as any miner can tell you. A mining family learns to live with danger and hardship. One disaster followed heavy rains in February 1923. At the number 201 mine site, rain-soaked earth slid from the steep slopes near the tipple, completely covering the rail line at the bottom and burying a locomotive. Dates on the old photos show that almost a month later, the work of digging out was still going on. The part of Letcher County that was to become Jenkins was the scene of some notable events and produced notable people who bear mentioning. They are part of the lore and the legends that make that mountain area so colorful. During the Civil War, a young colonel, James A. Garfield, led his brigade to score a decisive victory over rebel forces holed up in Pound Gap. Although the Confederates were strong in numbers and well fortified, the ingenious officer, guided by an old volunteer mountain man, took his troops up the steep snow-covered slopes of Pine Mountain and outflanked the rebels. The Confederate forces, surprised by this maneuver, abandoned their fortifications and fled. Colonel Garfield was promoted to brigadier general following this victory, and 2 decades later became the 20th president of the United States. Another notable who was to make that area famous through his writings was John Fox Jr., an author who loved the mountains of eastern Kentucky with a passion. He wrote a novel published in 1908 entitled The Trail of the Lonesome Pine. The book is about the area that was to become Jenkins a few years later. A giant pine on the ridge of Cumberland Mountain, called Pine Mountain by the natives, was the inspiration of his popular novel. Fox wove some of the local characters into his story. Devil Judd Tolliver was said to be Bad John Wright, a local peace officer about whom a number of legends circulated. It was said Wright killed 28 men in gun battles. although when interviewed, he admitted killing only 7 in the line of duty. The area's infamous feuding families, the Hatfields and McCoys, are represented in Fox's book by the Tollivers and the Phalens. Ironically, a member of the McCoy family served as Jenkins' undertaker in the early days. George McCoy drove the departed to their last resting place in his horse-drawn hearse. Fox's novel was made into a successful movie and a stage play. Filmed first in 1915 by Cecil B. DeMille, it was later rerun in 1936, featuring Fred McMurray, Henry Fonda, Sylvia Sidney, and Beulah Bondi. Another author brought attention to the Jenkins area with his famous novel, From Here to Eternity. James Jones used Jenkins-born Robert Lee Stewart as the model for his leading character, Private Robert E. Lee Pruitt. Jones and Stewart served together in F Company of the 27th Infantry Regiment stationed in Schofield Barracks, Hawaii. Another East Kentuckian, George Wilkinson of Hazard, also appears in Jones' book as Saul Anderson. Wilkinson entertained his barracks buddies with his ever-present guitar. From Here to Eternity was filmed starring Frank Sinatra, Burt Lancaster, Deborah Carr, and Montgomery Clift. Jones picked Clift for the role of Private Pruitt because he said Clift looked very much like Stewart. Another man from Jenkins who served in the armed forces and who created quite a stir in the world's press was Francis Gary Powers. His ultra-secret U-2 spy plane was shot down May 1st, 1960, while on a mission high over the Soviet Union. Powers' plane was damaged by a near miss from a Soviet air-to-ground missile and crashed near Sverdlovsk. He, however, managed to parachute to safety and was captured by the Soviets. Powers was brought to trial for espionage in Moscow and sentenced to 10 years confinement, the first 3 years to be in prison. Powers' parents and his wife, Barbara, were permitted to attend the trial, although he was not allowed to meet with them until after the verdict. He was released in a prisoner exchange on February 10, 1962, after having been locked up for 21 months. Powers had spent the summer of 1950 as a lifeguard at the Kiwanis Club pool in Jenkins. That October, he was inducted into the Air Force as an enlisted man that went on to win his wings as a commissioned officer pilot. Folk music has always been a vital part of mountain people's lifestyle. Notes from fiddles and a variety of other string instruments reverberate across the hills and valleys of eastern Kentucky, evoking emotions ranging from joy to sadness. You can often tell the region a folk musician hails from by his own distinctive style. One Jenkins coal miner turned musician who has earned a reputation as a folk violin master is Kenny Baker. He played for more than 25 years with Monroe's Bluegrass Boys, and his style influenced a generation of bluegrass fiddlers. Baker is considered by many to be the most influential bluegrass fiddler in the world. His versatility includes bluegrass, swing, and Appalachian-style fiddling. More than 100 musical compositions have come out of his talented superstar of bluegrassdom. Tennessee Ernie Ford can also claim some roots in Jenkins. His grandfather, Walter Long, worked in the mines there for about 10 years. After leaving the mines, Long took a job as a company night watchman. Ford's affection for coal miners is reflected in his powerful recording of 16 Tons, a lament of the underground miner struggling to make ends meet. Jenkins is a friendly town, proud of its heritage and of its contribution to supplying fuel for the nation's steel mills. Change has been slow, to be sure, but perhaps that is one of its best attributes. Life is not easy in an area where unemployment sometimes reaches high levels, but Jenkinsites are survivors, as they have demonstrated in the past. These old photos taken in and around Jenkins during the years 1911 through the early 30s graphically show the process of creating a town out of a heavily forested, mountainous wilderness into an efficient, productive mining community. They can only suggest the indomitable spirits of the people who dedicated their energies and lives to bringing this dream into reality.
The birth of a coal mining town, Jenkins, Kentucky, that wonderful town. We hope you enjoyed the film. Thanks to Dave Zagier. It was from his files that we obtained the pictures, the historical data, and a lot of the other information used in the film. Our deepest appreciation also goes to Jerry Lanning of Lanning and Murphy Associates for his creative ability and organizational skill assembled all of the data which was in the film you have just seen.